Hi guys, welcome. So today we're going to be creating a simple tip calculator app on iOS in Xcode and using the Swift programming language. So, creating a tip calculator is not too difficult, but it's a great first app for beginners because it teaches you some of the basics. And I'm going to assume that in this tutorial you guys have some basic understanding about Xcode and Swift, and we're then going to just go ahead and create a simple app. Um, so to start off with, let's go and open up Xcode, and let's create a new project. So this will be an iOS application and a single view application. And single view application, is just something that a lot of developers just use to start off with because it's easily customizable. So you can, it's pretty much blank. So you can put whatever you want in there. So I'll call this tip calculator as a project name. Oh, before I go on, actually, make sure all the boxes at the bottom are checked. Based off your version of Xcode, you might have one, two, or three boxes. Make sure they're checked. And over here, make sure the language is Swift and not Objective-C, since this tutorial is done in Swift. So now just go ahead and store it wherever you like on your computer. And we'll create the project just like that. Awesome. So now if you look on the left, we have our storyboard file, which is basically our XML file displayed as an interface builder for us, and we have a viewController.swift file. So we're given one view controller to begin with, and it's blank right here. And just for the purposes of this tutorial, since I'm not going to be talking too much about auto layout or constraints, let's just set the size to iPhone 4-inch because we're not going to get into how to get your app set up for phones of different sizes. So this just doesn't take up as much space on our screen, gives us some more freedom to move around and drag and drop whatever we need to. Okay, so what's the first thing that we want to do? Well, before going about creating an app, you first sort of need a vision. You need to know what your app is going to look like, what different elements it's going to incorporate, and what sort of code it's going to need. And since this is our first app, I actually have a previous version of this done, and I'll show you guys what the app looks like when it's complete. So the app will look like this. So it won't just be any tip calculator. We'll make it look a little bit nice, and it's gonna have this background, and this background will have sort of like a black filter over it so that we can see our text on our button a little more. And then we're gonna have a label right here that says tip calculator. Then we'll have a button down over here that says go to calculator, and when we click this button, then we'll be taken to another screen, and in this screen we'll have one text field that says 0.00 as a placeholder, and let's say we type in an amount, let's say 5. Then it'll calculate the tip for us for 10, 15, and 20%, and it'll display it right here on the right. So okay, so we know that there's sort of like two screens in our application, but now that we know what it looks like, let's go ahead and make it. So let's go back to our project, and on the first screen, the first thing that we want is that nice background. So we want an image for a background, so what we'll do is an interface builder on the right over here where you have a bunch of different UI elements that you can drag in. We will search for image, and we'll find this image view right here. So we can drag this image view into our view controller, and we can adjust its width and height so that it fits the screen, just like that. And you'll notice that in Xcode, it'll give you a lot of like tips. So like let's say I'm right here. So when I'm trying to drag and drop, then it'll give me all these tips that it'll give me all these lines that tell me, hey, are we centered on the screen, or are we centered horizontally or vertically, which is really nice because for positioning all of our UI elements, that's something that would really help developers out. So now we have this image view which takes up the entire screen, and for this image view we are going to add an image, and before we can add that image we need to go find one. So typically what you want to do is when you're going on the internet, you want to make sure that whatever image you find is free for commercial use and doesn't have any copyright restrictions on it. And there's many websites that do this. You can just go online and type in free stock photos, for example. One nice website for this that I've heard of is called pixabay.com. So we'll go to pixabay.com and we'll search for let's say restaurant. And this will give us a bunch of different pictures about restaurants, and we can go ahead and find one that we like. Let's take a look here. So out of all these images, we can choose any one, and I already have mine downloaded. You guys can go ahead and select yours, but once you download your image, then you have it in Finder somewhere, right? So find that location in Finder and copy it, and now we want to navigate in Finder to where our project is. So I put mine in my apps folder right here. You can see, a bunch of my other apps right there, and I'm gonna go and find tip calculator all the way down here, and right in tip calculator I'll go into tip calculator again, and I'll create a new folder just so we can stay organized with all of our code files. It's just good practice. I'll call it images. I'll go inside it and I'll just paste it in there. And my image is called restaurant.jpg. But you guys can spend all the time you want, pick out an image that you like, and now what we need to do is add it to our XCode project. This is within our project directory, so you'll see that over here, this is our tip calculator directory. It has an .xcode project file, and then it has another tip calculator folder where we see some of these .swift files that we see in XCode right here. And then in the images folder, we have the image that we want. But how do we add it to XCode? So now good practice these days is to add it to this assets.xcassettes right here. So you go to Finder and you just drag the image into assets.xcassettes. And now it's in our project. So now we can use it. So now if you go to main.storyboard and you select this image view, you click on this button up here, and in the image we can type in the name of the image, so restaurant, and you'll see that it automatically appears right there. So then I'll press enter, and there's our image. But you'll see, the image is sort of like stretched, and I don't really like that. I would rather have a smaller portion of the image that looks better. So instead of scale to fill, we'll set the content mode to aspect fill. And yeah, to me that looks a little bit better. So next thing that we want to do is, you have the option of either leaving it like this, or I personally like to make it look a little bit better. So sometimes I just add, a black filter over this so we can see the text a little bit more clearly. And there's multiple ways to add that black filter, but one way that we can do that is if you go online and you just find an image of something that is black, like a completely black image, and I'll show you an example. For example, if you find an image just like this, so completely black, then we'll take that black image and we'll copy it into our folder that we had the restaurant picture in. So restaurant.jpg is there and black.png is there. And similarly again, we'll drag that into assets.xcassettes so that we can use it in our XCode project. And now we'll go and we'll find another image view, and we'll drag that image view on top of this one so that it aligns just nice like it did before. And then we'll set its image to black. But now the entire thing looks black, which is not what we want. We still want the original image showing. We just want sort of a black filter over it so that we can see our text more easy. So then what we do is we set the alpha of the image, and the alpha is basically the opacity of any element. Most elements in Swift have this attribute, so you can set sort of how opaque they are. And in this case, I think 0.4 would be a nice number. So I've set that, and now we have this sort of cool black filter feel, which will be really nice when we add on a label. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's add on a label, let's align it in the center over here, and let's change the color to white for the text, and for the font, we can select a bunch of different custom fonts just like this. And let's say I choose that one, and then I can make the font as large as I want. I'll go a little larger, and if I double click on the label, then I can change its I can change its text. You also notice that over here I can change this text and customize the label as I want in Interface Builder. So I'm just going to call this label Tilt Calculator because that's the name of our app today. Then I'll go ahead and I'll center it, and I'll make it a little bigger, and then I'll go on the screen and I'll drag it so that I see this blue dotted line, and I'll center it on the screen and put it somewhere that I like, closer to the top. So if I'm going too fast, stop me if you need to. That's the beauty of videos. You can pause and you can figure out, you can rewind, but I'm just going to speed ahead. So next thing that we want to do is add a button. So let's go down here where we find all our UI elements, and let's search for a button. So now we have this button, and we can drag it in, and I'll center it on this screen horizontally, and vertically I'll place it just wherever it feels good. And this button, the text for it, we're going to say go to calculator. So we have go to calculator, except we can't really read it like that. So let's make it look a little nicer. Let's change the font color to white, and let's scroll down here in Interface Builder, and we'll find the background right here. Right now it's set to no background, but let's make it this nice blue. Okay, so now we have a calculator button that looks a little better, but let's make it a little larger, and let's try and fit it to these margins. So if you look on the right, this line is showing up because that's the margin line. So I'll drag it over to both margins and make it a little taller, and then it looks like that. And to me, for a first app, that screen doesn't look too bad. Alright, so now once we've placed all of the elements on the screen, what do we want to do? Well, before moving on, we want to make sure that all of these elements have constraints. And what are constraints? They're basically just a way that we can tell the app that, hey, you have a bunch of dynamic content, right? So whenever something happens, the user does something, you change something, or let's say you even have a different phone size, then when you have constraints set, then it makes your app look good, because if you don't have constraints, then things can move around. Things can end up here, things can end up in a different size, and it just doesn't look how you want it to. But with constraints, what constraints do is it'll say, for example, okay, so I have this go to calculator button. It has to maintain this height and this width, so I'm going to make a constraint on the height and the width. It has to be a certain amount above the bottom of the container or above the element above, and it basically sets all these constraints in terms of UI so that your elements stay where you want them and look how you want them to be. As you become a more advanced developer, you'll have to do some of the constraints yourself, because auto layout doesn't always work. But XCode does have an auto layout feature that you can use to just add constraints for simple apps like these. So I'm going to select one element, and I'm going to go to this triangle down here, and if I click this add missing constraints right here, then it would add the constraints that I need for this one button right here. But I want to add it to all views in my view controller. So that's why I'm going to say add missing constraints down here, and now you'll notice that all of these have constraints added in. Alright, so now I have constraints right there, and let's go ahead and give our app a quick run. And that's what it looks like. So it looks nice, but I can click on this button and nothing's really happening. So as we remember from before, our final version of this app will have two screens. All right. So if we have two screens, that generally means we need two view controllers. So Xcode, when we have a single view application, it gives us this first view controller. For the second view controller, we'll just drag and drop it in here, and we'll go to the top and we'll change the size to iPhone 4" just to be, just to work a little easier right now. And now, what do we want to happen? When we click this button, we want to be taken to this next view controller right here. So in order to do that, we're going to click on Go to Calculator. We're going to hold the Control button, and we're going to Control drag so that this line appears to this next view controller right here. And once this box appears after we let go, then we'll click Show. And what that does is that creates a segue between these two view controllers. You'll see it's a storyboard segue. And that basically means that, hey, these two view controllers are now connected. So if you click on this button, you'll be able to go to this view controller. Because when you see this segue, you can see that it leads from the button to the view controller. Okay, awesome. So now, on our second view controller, let's just add any label in there. And we'll say new screen, and we just want to make sure that we test that our button works. So we'll just add the constraints real quick, and we'll run the app, and you'll see that once you click Go to Calculator, we're on our new screen. Awesome. So that's all working. Now let's get rid of this, and let's actually build our app the way we want it to look. So let's add a text field. So let's search for a text field right here. And we'll put it somewhere on the top. And when text fields have rounded corners like this, in the interface builder at least, you can't really adjust their height. And since there's not too much on the screen, I sort of want the height to be a little larger. So I'm going to click this type of text fields instead. And that way I can resize it as I want. And I'll fit it to the margins again. And I'll make it a little larger just like this. And over here, I can now set the placeholder text for this text field. So whatever's going to display before the user taps on the text field and types anything in. And we'll just put 0.00 there. But now you'll see this is all the way on the left, and that looks a little weird, to be honest. So let's put it in the center. Now there's one more issue. This is such a big text field, but the text is so small. So let's just make the text size a little larger. And about 20 looks good to me. Okay, so what do we want to do next? Well, as we remember from before, we want to calculate tip button. So we'll search for a button, and we'll drag in a button, and just like before, we'll customize it how we want. So for the button, I'll say the text is calculate, and then the text color, I'll make it white, and the background color for the button, I'll make blue, and then I'll stretch this button out, add it right here at the bottom, and okay, so now we have a calculate button right there. But now we also want some labels so that we can show our calculations, and we can also show, hey, this is the calculation for 10% and etc. So we'll take a label and we'll drag it in, and we'll pop it right here. And the cool thing is in Xcode, it lets you do keyboard shortcuts like Command C, Command V, Command D. So I'm just going to duplicate these because I know I need 6 of them. Alright, so I have 6 of them right now. So I'll place one label right there, and one right here, and one right here, and one right here, and I'm going to align it up. You can align them with these blue lines. And then I'll place another one right here, and the last one right here. So in this one, I'm going to type in 10%. In this one, I'm going to type in 15%. And in this one, I'm going to type in 20%. Awesome. So when there's no value in here, then this is just going to be NA because no value has been typed in, and same for all the rest. So basically what we want to happen is when the user types in something to this text field right here, some number, and presses calculate, then the 10, 15, and 20% tips are computed, and then they're displayed in these labels. So these labels won't change, but these labels will. Alright, so now that we have all these elements on our screen, why don't we add our constraints? Awesome, so we have our constraints. But let's go ahead and clear all these constraints out. And the reason for that is that we have not made these large enough. So let's make these a little bit larger. And we'll do a line right on all of these. Alright, so now let's go back and add the constraints again. So add missing constraints. Alright, we'll see that constraints are added everywhere now. And right now, all we've done is just worked in interface builder. So we haven't actually written any code for the app. And that's something that we need because we want to be able to calculate all this stuff. So this next part's really important. So for this view controller over here, all we're doing is a segue. We don't need too much code. So we're not going to really write anything in the viewcontroller.swift file, which is the corresponding file for this view controller right here. But we have a second view controller right now, and we don't have a second viewcontroller.swift file. So let's go ahead and create one. We'll go to File, New File, and we'll make sure it's a Cocoa Touch class. And we'll make sure it's a subclass of UI view controller, and we'll call it Second View Controller. And we'll press Enter, and we'll pop it into our project directory right there. Awesome. So now we have a second view controller class, and over here we can go and click this yellow button on the second view controller, and we'll click this button right here in Interface Builder, and now we can specify its class, and you'll see it pops up right there. So we'll press Enter. So now basically what we've done is we have the storyboard element, right? And we have this these viewcontroller.swift and second viewcontroller.swift files. We've basically connected this storyboard element to the code. We've said that, hey, for this second viewcontroller, second viewcontroller.swift is the file that'll have the code for it. Similarly, if you click on viewcontroller right here, which is provided to us, you'll notice that viewcontroller.swift is the corresponding file. So now we want to worry about writing the code for this viewcontroller right here. In order to do that, I sort of want to see both my storyboard and my code side by side. So I'll click this button right here at the top, and that'll split screen it for me. And I'll scroll over so I have this view controller in my view, and I have this second viewcontroller.swift file also here. So we have a bunch of UI elements over here, but we want to be able to reference their properties via the code and modify them. And in order to do that, we want to create referencing outlets for all of the UI elements that we want to modify via our code. So which ones do we want to modify? Let's think about it. This one we definitely want to modify because we want to get its information when the user types something in. The calculate button, we will want to modify it because when someone calculates something, when someone presses this calculate button, then we want some code to be executed, but we'll do this one last. Other than that, all these three labels will be modified because they'll display the corresponding text, but none of these will. These will all stay the same. So for right now, we'll try and connect this text field and these three labels. And the way we connect it is using a referencing outlet. So we click on the text field, we hold control, and we control drag over right under this class second view controller right here, right under that line, not inside here, right over here. So we'll call this first field anything that we want. We can name it what we like, and you'll see the connection type is outlet because we're creating a referencing outlet. I'll call it amount text field because it'll give us the amount that the user is paying for their meal, and accordingly we'll use that amount. So once we press enter, we'll notice that okay, now that we have this one line of code, and now in our code we'll be able to use amount text field and modify it, and we'll be able to use its information as we need. Alright, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for these different labels. For this, I'll call it 10% tip label. For this one, I'll call it 15% tip label. And for this, I'll call it 20% tip label. Awesome. So now we have all those values, we have all those outlets to use. So that basically connects these UI elements to our code file. And now what we want to do is we could put some code in view did load, but that's not what we want to do because we don't actually want to execute any code as soon as this view is loaded. View did load is sort of like the public static main, if you've done any Java, of Swift. And basically, as soon as this view controller appears, its view did load method will be called. That's the first thing that will happen. But in this case, we only want to execute code once this calculate button is clicked. So in that case, we'll control drag from calculate button right under here, and instead of an outlet, we'll make an action connection. And an action connection is basically whenever someone taps on this button right here, then we'll execute a code. We'll make a function run. And we'll call this function calculate tip. And we'll connect it. And now we have this calculate tip function right here where we can write code. Whenever we click on this button, this function will run. Awesome. So now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the amount from this text field. How do we do that? Well, we know that for amount, we want it to be a number. We want it to be a double because it can be 5, it can be 5.5, it can be 5.6. So we don't want an int, we want a double from it. So we'll say var amount equals amount text field, and you'll show that it'll autofill, dot text. And amount text field dot text will give you the text that the user entered in this field, and basically the text that is in the field when the calculate button was tapped. But amount text field will give us amount text field dot text will give us a string, and we actually want a double from it. So we need to typecast, or in this case, we want to make a double out of the string that we're provided. So we can make it just like that, double of amount text field dot text. And you'll notice over here that we have to deal with optionals. But for a lot of these errors, they're going to be quick fixes. So you just click on the red button, and then you double tap, and it does the fix for you. Awesome. So now we have the amount as a double, and just so you guys can see that, I'll add the type right here. So var double equals double amount text field dot text, and it's asking me to insert another one. All right. Okay. So what's next? Now that we have that amount, we want to make our computations. So let's say var 10% of amount, and I'm not naming variables very well. This is probably not how you want to name it in the industry, but just so you guys know what's going on, I'll name them very verbosely. So var 10% of amount equals amount times 0.1. Then we can do var 15% of amount equals amount times 0.15, and then var 20% of amount equals amount times 0.2. So I'll also add in the types for you guys, just so you guys know what types these are, but we don't actually need to add them in because we're instantiating them with those types in this case, but we can, and we'll do it anyways. Okay, so it's giving me all of these errors, and or not errors, these are just warnings, so this won't stop our code. We don't have to worry too much about it, but it's basically saying replace var with let, and there's a reason for that. It's because all of these values, I'm not going to be changing these. Once we set them once, they won't really change within one given function call. So that way I can just write let for these, and now it'll be giving us a different warning, but we don't have to worry about that right now. So now we have all of these different values computed, the 10% amount, 15% of amount, and 20% of amount. What do we want to do next? We've gotten the data from this text field that the users entered, and then we've calculated the corresponding tip amounts, but we need to set these labels, we want to set their text values to these amounts right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's see, our first label is 10% tip label, so we'll do 10% tip label dot text, we're setting its text, equal to 10% tip label dot text equal to basically the 10% of amount that we had right here. So 10% of amount, and we'll make that 10% of amount, well, that is a double. So what do we want to do? we want to make sure it's a string because 10% tip label.text is a string. So 10% of amount is a double, and we can convert it to a string just like this. We'll create a string out of it. So now the types match up, and we're all good. And I'm just going to take this line, and I'm going to copy it twice, and I'm going to say that, hey, 15% tip label will go here, and 20% tip label will go here, and 15% of amount will go here, and 20% of amount will go here. Awesome. So that should set all of it. So why don't we give it a spin? Alright, so here's our tip calculator. We'll press go to calculator. Over here we'll enter any amount. So let's say $15 was how much we paid for food. And over here we'll see the corresponding tip percentages, or the corresponding values for different tip percentages. Awesome. So now we've just built our first app, and we've made a simple tip calculator, and we've made it look decent. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do with customizing the UI, making it look nice, and there's a lot of cool things that you can do even for just making a tip calculator. So I encourage you guys to go on and give it a try in terms of trying to add more features to this tip calculator. And if it's your first app, just build it up. Just maybe work for an hour or two and add more features and see what you can do. So thanks so much for watching this video tutorial, and I hope you learned a little bit more about Xcode and Swift from it, and you learned how to make your first very basic tip calculator app. Thank you. Bye-bye.